I did not have my volume on, did I? I've been talking for 4 minutes without my volume. um, I know Cal's on there. Uh, sorry. All right, let me back up because I've been talking a lot of good stuff here. Boy, do I feel like an idiot. Minor idiot. This is the internet. Nothing's forever on the internet, right? All right. Sorry about that, guys. Let me go back, and I'm going to start from the beginning because what I wanted to do, I wanted to. And composer.json. Not JSON. Lock. All right. So what I wanted to do is the whole reason for me coming up with this notion of a Magium configuration setup is you may be familiar with, if you've been watching me for the past year or so, I've been doing a lot of work with Selenium testing, particularly with Magento, though building out libraries that are useful across multiple different scenarios. I've got a library for testing against Gmail, testing against, I think it's authenticating as Twitter, and a bunch of things like that. With the whole purpose being that you can pull in all these different things and build out Selenium tests, and it would all be wonderful. That is part of something that I have wanted to do for a while. I basically, the whole reason why I even built the Magium Selenium testing framework was because I wanted to have a testing framework that I liked. And this, with configuration here, it's no different. I've been in the industry now for longer than I would want to say, and I'm actually using the word industry, which tells you how old I am, which ironically, it is my birthday today. And configuration management has been one of the things that, a lot of people, they put it into their application because you have to have it. It'll be basically configuration files, any files, PHP files, YAML files, XML files, whatever it is. And it's really not particularly, for myself, it's not been what I've wanted to see. Now, for those of you who know, I've been working with Magento again for a number of years, and I actually like what they did with the configuration that they had. Namely, that it was designed to be extensible. So you could have multiple different third parties that could all provide their configuration and all make it available in one screen where you can configure and work with everything. And I've not really seen that in, I should say, in the general PHP library sense or framework sense. And there's obviously, when you have an application out there that people are supposed to connect in with, that's something that they often build into, but there's no real standardized way. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take that kind of a concept, an extensible, buildable concept, and make it available for just general PHP applications. So hence the Magium configuration manager. To get started, we'll go in here again. We'll start kind of where we started off. Composer require Magium configuration manager. And this will go and it'll install the manager and all the dependencies. Right now it's at version 0.8. 0.9 is going to be when I have the web UI done. There's going to be a command line interface. Actually, I have the command line interface already there. And I'm working on getting a web UI built out that can be injected into any any PHP-based application. So we go in there, we run the composer install, we have everything up and running, we have everything now in our vendor directory, and our composer.json is set up and ready to go. Now, in our vendor bin Magium in our vendor bin directory, there is a Magium configuration script that basically provides an interface to a command list that is intended to be used in multiple different scripts. This is here so that you have a place where it'll actually work, but if you have your own command line tooling that you've built out, it's intended to be integrated into there so that you only have one tool that you need to work with it. So this is here for convenience, but you can quite easily extend it and integrate into your existing, it uses the Symfony console mechanisms for that. So we'll start just by running it the first time, and it's going to note that we don't have a Magium configuration.xml file. Now you're looking at that and you're thinking, well, XML, it's kind of old. We've got JSON, we've got YAML, and a bunch of things that are actually a lot cooler. And while that may be true, there is just a tremendous infrastructure around XML tooling and a lot of things that, as you'll see in a moment here, will, I think, make things a little bit easier. And I think you'll see how I can justify the use of XML in this case. So we're going to take this, we're going to specify in our main project directory. And there is another file that it's asking about here called a context file. Now, if you're familiar with Magento, you have a global view, or I'll call it a global context, a website context, and a store view context. And like I said, I'm kind of stealing some stuff from Magento in terms of the overall principles that are actually being used here, where we can have a hierarchical, what's the word I'm looking for? A hierarchical waterfall of data coming into the individual contexts. So basically, context can inherit from context, and can have unique configuration values for the individual contexts. But in order for Magium to know about it, or as I call it the MCM, for the MCM to know about it, we need to have a context file. So we'll create it. Now we'll go back into here, and now we see we have our context.xml and our Magium configuration.xml. We'll open up the Magium configuration.xml, and it has a couple of nodes in here. Now this is the reason why I wanted to use XML, because if I go to the end here, I have code completion for all the different nodes that might actually be in there. This will actually become much more pertinent as we see some more complicated configurations. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to configure two different types of connections. The first is going to be a persistence connection. This is going to be to a database that contains all of the individual storage or all the individual values that are going to be stored. The second is for the cache. We try not to touch the database as often as possible. We want to do everything through the cache, and there's no point in rebuilding this object every time. So we're very dependent on the cache. Now there are two levels of cache, and I'm not going to go into demonstrating them, but you also can have a local cache, which you can set with a low TTL, say 10 seconds. So that basically every 10 seconds, the system is going to go off to the remote cache and get a new copy of the configuration files. The whole purpose of that being that you don't have a thundering herd on the remote servers. But you also want this to be a low TTL. But it's an optional thing. If it's not configured, it's not going to be used. So we have a file system adapter defined, and then we put in the cache dir, which is again default to the temp. This is basically going to be turned into an array and passed into the Zend cache storage factory to get a cache value. So it's basically anything that you want for a value in here, go to the Zend framework cache documentation and put it in there. Similarly, for the persistence configuration, we need to provide a driver. Again, it's using ZendDB. So we'll use PDO SQLite, and we'll say we will go to temp, and we'll just call it config. There may actually be some data in here, but we'll see. So that configures our persistence and our cache. And if we run this, we'll see a bunch of our configurations. Now what we need to do is we need to tell the database to actually create its table. So we'll just do Magium configuration create table. It's a one-time thing you need to do just to tell it to actually do the DDL and create the actual table to actually set this stuff up in there. So now it's basically ready where we can start doing some work in here. So we will go and we will create a new directory, and we're going to call it Etsy, and we'll call and create a new file in there, and we'll call it settings.xml. And it's going to be an XML file. And we're going to have a configuration node. Now I've got a conflict on here, and it doesn't happen on my other system, but it happens in here. But we want to have a namespace of www.magiumlib.com/configuration. And you might be wondering where it gets that. Well, glad you asked. Configure completion.xsd, which is in the assets directory here. Now the reason we have that in there is because it makes it easier for code completion and making sure that you have a valid document. Because I've done a lot of work with the Zen framework and stuff, and I always end up having to debug the dependency injection container to figure out what my configuration was, how my configuration was wrong. And by doing this, I simply have to do code completion, and I've got my entire structure set up for me. So I'll have a section. I'm going to call it site, and I'm going to have a group, and it's going to be called head, and an element, and it's going to be called title. Now, there's going to be a lot of features that you'll have built into here that you can do filtering and a bunch of other things, but there's a couple of things that are working out of the box right now. First one is that I can provide a description. So I can say a title for the website. I can give it a default value called title or something like that. And then I can also, if I have something that is more flag based, I can also do a permitted values. I can do on, off, or something like that. And if I try to set a value other than that, it'll give me an error. So those are some things that you have in there. It's also useful for third-party modules. If those third-party modules are using it, when you try to make a setting that it doesn't allow for, then it'll throw an exception and say, hey, you can't do that. So it allows for third-party modules to have some level of control over the data that's being passed in there so that they get what they're expecting. So we have the settings file in there. And now the last thing we need to do before we start doing some coding is we need to tell Magium where can it find these settings files. So the way we do that is we first say, we look for the configuration directories, and it's going to be etc, which is basically either a real path or relative to the Magium configuration directory. And we do this so that Magium knows which directories are actually safe to look for configuration files. And then we will have another one called configuration files, and we put our settings.xml in there. At this point, the entire system is configured and ready to be used. So we can go to our command line tool, and we can do list keys, and we see that we have our values that are in there. On top of that, we could also say we want to copy this, and we'll call this, I don't know, settings 2. I can give this one an element of title 2. I'll go in here and I will duplicate this. And I just realized I haven't tested doing this. It is my in there. And okay, yeah, we see site and title 2. And you'll see that they're actually merged under the same node names there. Now I think if I do this, I can actually show some of those values, say default value, and I can say description, the site title. I think these should show up. Yes. So now we see site head title default value is the default value, and it says the site title is the description for it. So you can pass all that meta information in there. So, and I'm also going to get rid of this settings file because I don't really need it for demonstration purposes. Do that, and now we're back to our original value. So now that we have our original value, we're going to set that value. We'll do set, and we'll copy and paste this, and it will be, we'll just leave it like this and call it main site title. And you'll note here, we said set the site head title to main site title, and the context is default. Does that mean that we can have different values for different contexts? Well, absolutely yes. So one of our contexts is production. We'll add a couple of additional ones in here. We'll call it context ID is website 1, and give it a nice title of website 1. Oops, and do that nicely. And we'll do a second one of website 2. And I think that I also have one here that says list contexts or contexts. Is that it? Oh, yeah, list contexts. You can see all the different contexts that are in there with their hierarchical relationships. So what I can do is I'll take this then, and I'm going to call this the website 1 title and pass as a second argument the actual context itself. And we'll see set head title, website 1 title, and the context is website 1. Now, all this is doing is just basically doing some basic CRUD operations into the database. What we need to do now is we need to build the actual configuration file. And that's fairly easy to do. You'll note the instructions there. Magium configuration build. And you'll see that we've built the contexts, or all the different contexts in there. So we've got our persistence set up, we've got our context set up, we've got our settings set up, and we've got some settings in the system. Now let's actually do something with it. So we'll create a new PHP file called pub index, and this is just going to be a simple PHP file, HTML, PHP, you guys know what I mean. And we'll put a title in there. We will do a require once for the dir vendor auto loads. So obviously I'm not using a framework here, but everything is kind of built with frameworks in mind. Now you didn't see it, but we have a manager and a builder running behind the scenes. Those are, you can directly access them yourself, or what you can do is utilize a factory. There's a factory built into the system. So do factory equals new Magium configuration factory, and it will find this Magium configuration.xml file and basically configure everything for all that it needs. Now, the only part your application really needs to know about is the manager, because the manager will get you the correct configuration file for what you're looking for. So if we do this, we'll get our config equals factory get manager get configuration, which will return an instance of the configuration repository class. We'll do PHP echo. We won't bother with escaping anything. Config get value site head title, which, cross my fingers, this should now work. So I'll just do this locally here. PHP 7 pub index, and there we go. We see main site title. But like I said, one of the things we don't want to do is we don't want to be spending a lot of time with different configuration files for different types of sites, and we want to use that context scenario so that these values can bubble down into the different contexts. So if we look at this configuration, we can actually get the individual context object for a particular context. The way that you can work is if you have a bootstrap file or something like that, just do something like get env, the environment or whatever it is, and you'll get a context file that matches the environment that it says. I don't have an environment variable set up, so what I'll just do is website 1 and rerun the script, and now we see website title. So, this is very useful for doing simple things like, again, like changing titles that you might not want to have to go and pull all the stuff from a database, just pull it from a cache or pull it from a config and make it easier. But where I think this really becomes useful is when you start talking about third-party implementations. Now, for example, a lot of us are using Redis as a cache or a data store or something like that. Redis itself doesn't know anything about Magium or the MCM or anything like that. So what I did was I built this took me about an hour or so to build a factory that kind of integrates the two of them together. So it's called the Redis factory. So composer, require, Magium, Redis factory. And so we've installed the Redis factory in there. So the way we work with this then, actually, before I do that, we installed the Redis factory. And like I said, one of the purposes of the configuration manager is to give you an extensible thing that third parties can use. So beforehand, when we did our list keys, all we got was that one key that we set up in our settings.xml file. Now, when we run list keys, we now have the Redis host, Redis port, Redis timeout, all this other stuff that we can now configure. So it could be Redis, could be Mongo, it could be pretty much anything that and all you have to do is build a factory that understands how to talk to the Magium configuration in your system. So you can build something if you have a third-party library. It's called the configuration file repository class. Does that class exist? Then inject this information into the configuration manager. And if you want to see how that looks, it was a quick diversion here. Magium configuration manager and Redis factory. And in our registration.php, we just basically get an instance, and I know it's a singleton, and yes, I know unit testing it is a pain in the butt. But we'll add the secure base saying that, in my etc directory, and then we register that configuration file, and we say that it's going to be an XML file or a PHP file or whatever it is, as long as it's supported, and it'll merge that in with the overall configuration. And that's pretty much all that's necessary. So let's get rid of this then, and we'll ask Redis, or we'll ask the factory for the configuration. And we'll do a var dump Redis keys star. And so now we will do our pub again. And, Redis server went away. Docker ps. Well, that is odd. That's fine. We'll just do a configuration change here. If I do the set Magium Redis host as magento.loc, which should work, and we'll rebuild the cache. Oh, that's why it didn't work. It was because it didn't rebuild the cache. That's fine. We'll run that, and now we're getting our data from the other machine. Or we could also do the website one, and this will probably still be the same because it actually inherited. But if we do a setting, the host there for website one, and we will change it to localhost and rebuild the configuration and run it again. We're now pulling it from a different server. Now we're pulling it from our default, just by that simple change there. So this is a basic look. I shouldn't say basic, it's actually fairly comprehensive, but what it does give you is an insight into how the system can actually work, and some of the things that you can do with it, and how you can manage your configuration a little bit easier. Configuration is a horribly boring subject. Nobody wants to talk about it, and I don't blame them. It's kind of like Selenium testing in that way. Everybody talks about it. Nobody really wants to do it. And so what I did is I built something that was what I wanted. Something that gave me different contexts, allowed it to be extensible, and easily integratable into your into your environment, and doesn't require a code deployment to make any kind of changes. So that's about all I have to show right now. Like I said, it's on version 0.9 right now. And we're going to, or 0.8, 0.9 is going to be when there's a web UI that is available. And with that, does anybody have any questions that you want to put you can put it either in the chat for YouTube, or you can tweet to me. I'm watching both of those on different screens out here. Your eyes are probably glossy by now, but basically what it comes down to is you can set these things up via these settings files, and you don't have to worry about managing your own configuration. So let's give there's a couple of people on the video right now. If you have any questions, again, put them into the chat or tweet at me. If not, then feel free to drop off. And again, if you have any questions, yes, let's not forget about this. This is the configuration manager URL on GitHub. This is where I'm building all of the building this out. You have a little bit more easy to follow documentation in here, and yeah, let me know what you're thinking. So thanks a lot for joining. I know a bunch of you guys were had to put up with the junk where I forgot to set my volume, but thanks for staying on. I really want to get people's input on this. I really want to get pull requests. It's tough to say, obviously, because this is just me working on it right now. You have to kind of figure out what's from my brain, but I would love to have input. Email me. If you don't have my email address, you can just do kschroeder@magmlib.com or go to magmlib.com, and there should be an email button here that just, oh wait, that's a subscribe. I thought I have a contact list in here somewhere. I would think that I'd have a contact list. Oh well. Oh yeah, hey, contact. There we go. If you don't have my email address, send me there. I would love to hear from you, and any thoughts on improvements and things like that. I would love to have. So, thanks a lot for jumping in, and have some fun with your configuration. See you online.